I'll take your full name and title, please, as always.
Sure. So I'm Carolyn Quach. I'm a pediatric infectious diseases and medical microbiologist at St. Justin and professor at Université de Montréal.
Amazing. So I want to talk to you about the red zone and what the new measures from the government mean for Montrealers.
Well, it basically means that we have to stay home except for going to work or going to school. That's basically what it means. It was a way, I think, for the government to try and limit our social interactions as much as possible.
Why at this time is it so important to implement? What is critical about this particular moment?
Well, we've been seeing an increase in cases for the past week and a half, with an increase in the Montreal area, where I think there's been multiple outbreak settings that were not easily identified. And so when you're not able to say exactly where cases are coming from, then the only way to try and stop the increase in cases is to cut social interactions, well, physical interactions, because what the government has said is that the various hospitals are not able to cope with an increase in demand, knowing that we, this time around, by opposition to what had happened in March and April, is that we can't defer surgeries and cancer treatment and other things much longer. And it's okay, we need to treat other patients and not just keep a space for COVID patients, even though, and I agree with you, at this point in time, the number of admissions and death are not major. I think what the worry was is that if you let it go, eventually what is being transmitted in the younger people is going to trickle to older people and to people who are vulnerable who will end up being admitted.
Of course, many people follow these rules, but there are some who don't. So why is right now the I guess the tipping point and the time that people should follow?
Because we're really seeing the increase is almost exponential right now. So there's a tipping point in the curve where if you don't slow it before that, it just becomes uncontrollable. And so I think that's why the government decided to do it now, also keeping in mind that Thanksgiving is coming up, and that it's usually a time for people to meet and travel. And it was, I think, to decrease that risk of having gathering that would increase even more transmission of COVID.
So you were saying to prevent, a major spike in that curve. Let's say this is the tipping point. So what we do right now can make or break it, right?
Right, exactly.
So, will do you think this shutdown specifically will help prevent that? Are you hopeful?
I think it's always hard to say, right? Because when you're putting in place a preventive measure, knowing what would have happened had you not put that in is actually impossible. If it works and if things, slow down, then some people will say, well, it would have slowed down anyway. But it's very possible that it is a preventive action. But it's hard to measure. I don't think we had a choice, seeing what was happening. And I hope that in 4 weeks' time, things will be better enough to be able to start living again. I think by that time, we also need to have in place other ways of following contagion. Because at this point in time, if you look at what, let's just say, the Montreal Public Health Unit needs to do, which is to call 300, on average, 300 positive cases a day to see who their contacts were, to be able then to quarantine them, it's insane. And I think what we're seeing now is that each people has the same number of contacts that they had before pandemic. So it's not calling back 3 to 4 people you were, in the house with. It's calling back 20 to 25 people. So just imagine 300 times 20 is impossible to track. So we need another way to track that, be it through an app that is helping public health or through other ways, but there needs to be another way.
And in terms of, the next 4 weeks, as you mentioned, there's a possibility you're saying that we could get back to a somewhat normal life. these measures specifically, you're confident can help us change the course of the pandemic, or do you think more needs to be done?
Well, I don't think that more can be done at this point in time. Um, I think that the the what we really need here is to decrease contacts with other people, and so that's closing restaurants and bars. That's what it's aiming to do. Is that you're not within 2 meters of someone else for a prolonged period of time, someone else who you probably would not be living with most of the time. You're going out with friends and families, and not necessarily your household. Um, I don't think that at this point in time school should be closed. I think that the reason why we're trying to slow the transmission down is also to allow our children to go to school in some normal fashion. And at this point in time, yes, there have been cases in schools. Some schools have even needed to close because of outbreaks, but most of the time it's been okay. And schools so far have been more of a consequence of we've been seeing in the community rather than where outbreaks start.
Do you have any, I guess, preference in terms of the measures? Restaurants, bars needed to close, but is there anything else that should have been closed, or did you mind, like, let's say, like hair salons? Is there something different that you would have perhaps implemented?
Well, I think hair salons, as long as people are able to wear their masks, it's okay. I think actually that, and it's been discussed, I'm not sure that um, museums, libraries, movie theaters and theaters actually needed to close. I think that the reason why um, the government decided to close them was really to try and limit as much as possible social activities. But where you're wearing a mask and being quiet, I think is okay. But the message, I think, needed to be that we had to stick together, and we have to try and decrease transmission as much as possible, so that in 4 weeks time it'll be better.
But not in the same way that we did back in April, where everything was shut down, right? So this is a different situation. Schools and businesses are still operating. So is that sort of counterintuitive?
It might look counterintuitive, but I think it's more the fact that we can't just close down forever. We have to take into account the other negative impacts that are happening when we close down everything. So we know that the complete close up in the spring had immense negative impacts on our children's psychological health. We can't just close everything down in terms of economy, because you have to have some sort of a society that still functions. So it's to try, I think, and preserve what is absolutely needed. Our children need education and learning in front of a screen without having their teacher in front of them, without having their friends around, is not something that we want at all. I would have been very disappointed had that happened.
Is there anything else you want to add? I have no more questions, but something you want to leave off with?
No, I think it's not an easy decision to take. Um, there are things that could be debatable, but the main message is we need to stick together, stop transmission as much as possible. And then when we get back to life, remember what needs to be done, because this pandemic is far from being over. I think that, we are all hoping for a vaccine soon, but even when the vaccine becomes available, if it becomes available, there won't be enough doses to vaccinate the entire Canadian population. So it will be done in phases. So people need to realize that even when we have a vaccine, it's not a miracle. It'll take months before the entire population is vaccinated.
Thank you so much, Dr. Quach. I appreciate it.
Good luck. I don't know